Welcome everyone to the Great White Sharks webinar. This is very exciting. This is the first sharks webinar that I have seen, and I think that many people have seen. So just welcome everyone. And before I turn it over to the Island Wildlife chapter, I'm just going to go over some tech things. So if you'd like to ask a question at any point, you could ask that right in the chat, which will be right here, popped on up. You can also ask it in the question and answer box, and you can just ask a question directly in there, and we will either get to it during the presentation or after the presentation. And if you would like to unmute yourself to ask a question, we will have to go ahead and do that for you. So you can actually raise your hand, just like I'm doing right here, and we will spot your hand and make sure your question gets asked. So I'm going to turn it over to Virginia Holman, who is the president of the Island Wildlife Chapter.
Hello, I'm Virginia. I'm very happy that we have Dr. Bob Hueter with us today. Bob is a professional marine scientist with more than 4 decades of experience specializing in the biology, fisheries, and conservation of sharks. Bob earned his bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Miami and his doctoral degree from the University of Florida. He's published more than 200 scientific papers on sharks and has served on numerous panels and boards dealing with sharks and other migratory marine fishes. He's served on NOAA's Highly Migratory Species Advisory Panel continuously since 1997, and he's testified 3 times before the U.S. Congress in hearings on shark issues. Bob's played a leadership role since the early 1990s in both the state of Florida and on the national level to promote public understanding of sharks and the implementation of shark conservation measures. After a 33-year career at Mote Marine Laboratory in Sarasota, Bob retired in December of 2020 and has continued as chief scientist for the nonprofit organization OSEARCH. His current research with OSEARCH is focused on revealing the complete life history, population status, and health of the great white shark in the Northwest Atlantic. Thank you so much. Welcome, Dr. Bob Hueter.
Thank you very much, Virginia, and it's great to be with everybody today. I hope everybody is safe and has had a great summer and looking forward to the fall. I know I am. The ship behind me is our research ship. I just got off her about a week or so ago up in Nova Scotia, Canada, where we had a very successful expedition, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. I have worked on sharks my whole career. I consider myself to be a marine biologist, but a shark specialist, and I'm happy to talk about questions, anything to do with sharks that I might be able to answer. But we're going to focus on what my current passion is, what my current livelihood is with working with the organization OSEARCH and this great project that we have going on the great white shark of the Northwestern Atlantic, or what we scientists simply refer to as the white shark. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, Virginia, and we'll pull up the presentation. Are we good to go? Okay. So I'm calling this Mysteries of the Great White Shark, How Scientists Are Solving the Puzzle and Discovering the Importance of the Carolinas. I want to bring it back home to you all there. And by the way, I want to make a statement at the beginning that we're highly interested in any and all information that anyone in this webinar might have on white sharks in North Carolina waters. Any kind of sightings, any kind of questions, certainly photographs and videos will always help us in our research. Citizen science is a big part of what we do. But I'm serving as the chief scientist for the organization OSEARCH. Now I want to explain a little bit about what OSEARCH is. We're a nonprofit organization. OSEARCH, the name is a combination of ocean and research. Basically a research and educational organization established to accelerate the return to balance of our ocean resources and in a very unusual way. It's a very unique organization, very innovative. We're not an academic entity. We're not even an independent laboratory. We're a combination of scientists working with business entrepreneurs to forge ahead with what we need to discover in the oceans. And the reason that we feel a need for this innovative approach is that we are in some kind of trouble with getting things back into balance, especially in the oceans, which are so vitally important to us in so many ways. And it starts with data, having the data to formulate our policy decisions should be based on the best available science. So we need the data to manage our oceans back towards abundance and sustainability. Now, I've been a scientist, I said, for more than 4 decades, and the traditional approach has typically been this shown here, where you got one scientist whittling away at one project, taking more than 5 years, yes, with a staff around them and so on, and there are collaborations, but it's basically led by one person, going from first having to raise the money, pay for the research, then collect the data, analyze the data, and publish the data, and then hope that it somehow gets to the policy arena. This process can take 5 years or more, 10 years sometimes, or even more than that. So what we're trying to do is accelerate this by pulling together a diverse and innovative funding base based on philanthropy, on e-commerce of OSEARCH products, corporate giving, and so on, that you see on the left there, foundation grants, and then our corporate sponsorships sponsors organizations like Yeti and SeaWorld are very important for funding the operations. And with this, then, we form a collaborative team of scientists coming from many institutions in many countries. We start collecting data. If you go sort of clockwise around this circle here, collect the data using our research ship, the OSEARCH. We also have a very intensive and very well viewed public awareness and outreach component. So a lot of what OSEARCH does is public education this way. And then finally, we're getting around to where we collect the data, we open source the data. Open sourcing, in other words, providing the data for free to the public so they can see what's happening with the sharks that we're studying, is a very important part of our core mission. And then publishing the results through peer review, going through peer review, not shortcutting the process, but peer review of our papers, getting those papers then into the policy arena, and then engaging policymakers to make changes to get us back toward healthy oceans. And this is basically the model that we're using. So let's step back a second and say, why did we choose this to work on the white shark? Well, for a number of reasons. First of all, white sharks are super predators of all the shark species in the oceans, eating fish, squid, marine mammals, other things. And as such, they're kind of the balance keeper. They're the top of the food web. Yeah, there are some things that will eat some white sharks, but pretty much the super predator of all. So very important in ocean balance and ecology. This is a species found worldwide in cool temperate zones. They really like this 55 to 75 degree temperature range, but we find them in sometimes in warmer temperatures and very often in very cold temperatures down to even below zero. This is because they have a system that's unusual for sharks that makes them, in a sense, sort of warm-blooded like mammals. We can talk about that if you like. But primarily the white shark is not an open ocean species, except in some parts of its life history. It's primarily a dweller of the continental shelf, and they spend a surprising amount of time along the coast, right up close to the coastline, in places where people never knew they were before, including the Carolinas. But they also go into the open ocean and deep sea at times. Now, the life, what we call the life history, the time it takes for these animals to mature, this is still being studied, and I think it's different for different ocean basins, but the males are thought to take up to about 20 years to mature, and the females about 30. It could be less in the Atlantic basin. We're finding that some of our males and females seem to be adults at smaller sizes and thus probably younger ages. Now, the adult females have pups. Again, the cycle of reproduction is not well worked out, especially in the Atlantic, but maybe every 3 years. Pregnancy, remember, sharks mate. They don't spawn like the other fish, but they mate, and the females get pregnant. We think gestation might take 1.5 years or so, something on that order. And the females give birth to what we call a litter of pups. An average of 7 animals. They might be about 4 feet, 3.5, 4 feet long. And then the animals live to a ripe old age of about 80 years. So it's kind of interesting. In some ways, they're very similar to us in terms of how long it takes them to mature and how long they live. I guess the litter size, that's quite different though. They're not considered an endangered species in the US. They are considered endangered species in Atlantic waters of Canada. But globally, they're classified as vulnerable on what's called the IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, Red List. They are prohibited from being kept and retained in the U.S. Atlantic, and as I mentioned, they're considered endangered in Canada. And there's no denying this part of it. The very few fatal attacks that occur on people by sharks throughout the world, maybe 10 or so, a dozen a year, of these, the white shark is responsible for most of them over time. Now, as I said, it's considered vulnerable by the IUCN. This is a global assessment with a decreasing population trend. So it's kind of bad news. And we always see these terrible statistics. Oceanic sharks have declined by 71% since 1970. And the fact is that when you start cutting out the upper part of the food web, in this case, the top predator sharks, then it has this ripple effect, which we call a trophic cascade, a cascade of effects down through the food web. And this is because on the top of the food web, or in this case, a food pyramid, the sharks are exerting important control. And if you remove that capstone on the top, then things start to happen that cascade down through all the way to the base. Some of the things we might consider to be okay, like more of a certain kind of species, but whatever happens, we have to live with it for a long time because the sharks don't bounce back. And when you look at one of these food webs, it looks more like this, very complicated interactions among species in the ocean, starting with the primary producers, the plants, the phytoplankton at the bottom, up to the zooplankton here, and then finally all these other species coming in the mix, everybody eating everybody else. When you look for sharks in one of these food webs, where you find them is at the top. And this is just a sort of a generic food web just to illustrate the place that sharks hold. But the real super predators are on top of the whole thing. That's us. And fishing has obviously disrupted these food webs to an extent. Sustainable fishing can coexist with a healthy ocean, but unsustainable fishing cannot. It essentially ruins the ocean. Well, okay, so I don't like to talk about bad news because, in fact, we have a lot of successes that are happening in the ocean. It's not hopeless. We are turning things around, especially on this coast in the Northwest Atlantic. If you look at white shark numbers from 1960 to the early to mid 90s, you see this decline of somewhere around 75%. Hard to actually quantify it, but definite declines in relative abundance of white sharks. And this is work that was done by a colleague, Tony Curtis of NOAA and co-authors. Then in the early 90s, 1993, actually, a fishery management plan came into effect for sharks. And then later, some years later, the white shark was put on the prohibited species list. And since then, the curve has been coming up. So there's no question, this ends at 2010 now. we got 10 more years of data, and there's no question that the white shark population is increasing in numbers on the U.S. Atlantic and Canadian Atlantic coast. So that's really good news. We're able to rebuild this population through management measures that include reducing bycatch of especially the juvenile white sharks in coastal fisheries. So with that as a background, we launched the North Atlantic White Shark Study to learn more about this species. And interestingly, even though JAWS was based in the U.S. Atlantic coast up in Massachusetts, New York area, we knew very little about the population in this part of the world as compared with off California, with in South Africa and Australia and other parts of their range. So we have put together over time a very complex and coordinated set of projects, 24 we're up to right now, led by 42 lead scientists from 30 different research organizations and other institutions. And we basically, our goal has been to sample and study, measure, examine, tag, and release alive 100 white sharks in the Northwest Atlantic to answer 100 questions about this species in this area. The collaborating institutions or organizations are shown here. There's some heavy hitters on here, folks. So you just look down. These are major universities and the big public aquariums. One of the things that we're proud of is that we have involvement of veterinary doctors from some of the best known aquatic or public aquariums. One of them is your own North Carolina Aquariums. We have a veterinarian, Emily Christensen, who's part of our group. NC State is got a project, and you can see all the other various organizations that are involved. So this is big science, folks. This isn't some backyard thing, and we're bringing all this science to the coast of North Carolina when we're there as part of our expeditions. I can't possibly summarize all of the research that is going on in all these 24 projects. What I've done is sort of sort them into these categories. And every animal that we touch is providing information, data, samples for all of these projects. And it goes to everything from the size of the population, their distribution, their migratory habits, their population genetics, to reproduction, where they're mating, obviously a critical part of the life history of these animals, and characterizing the state of the animals, the physiology of them when they're reproducing, to the threats that they face, the things like stress, environmental stress, doing just general health assessments. And that a lot of that's led by our veterinary folks that are on board for every single expedition, looking at contaminants, including heavy metals and now microplastics that affect them, what they feed on in a variety of ways, looking at their feeding ecology. We don't pump their stomachs or anything like that, but we can get these data on what they're eating by just taking a simple muscle sample or sampling the feces. And that's something that we do now on a regular basis and learn a lot from that. And then all the way to microbiology, looking at the bacteria that live in and on these animals and what those bacteria can produce for human medicine, even antibiotics that they're producing. Sharks, by the way, including the white shark, are known to heal very rapidly, and when they get wounded, and the healing process involves a complex suite of these bacteria that are being studied by a number of people, including Dr. Kim Ritchie from the University of South Carolina in Beaufort. The other part of this that's kind of interesting, Kim is collecting swabs, and I'll show a slide about this in a second, swabs from the teeth and the mouth, and she's characterizing the bacteria that live there and testing various kinds of off-the-shelf antibiotics on them. And with that, she's able to advise medical doctors when they have a shark attack victim who's bitten by a white shark, what kind of antibiotics they should use. Because if you survive a shark attack from a white shark, it's always bad from a white shark because they're big. Even if they do a bite and release, it's serious. If they survive that part of it, as many people do, then the next challenge is infection. And so we're able, with our work, to look at what's living in the mouth and advise the medical profession on how to treat those patients. Now, our primary tangible asset, our biggest asset, is our people and our crew and the expertise of our crew. Our fishing crew is the best in the world. The primary tangible asset is our research ship, the MV OSEARCH, just under 130 feet long. She was a Bering Sea crab boat. If you watch Deadliest Catch, this is the kind of ship that was shown in that. And our ship is special because she's outfitted with this hydraulic lift that you see deployed off the starboard side here that is able to be lowered in the water, and we can work on the animals on this lift and keep the animals safe and keep ourselves safe as well, and then tag them and release them from this point. So I'm going to show a video now of an example video of the process of bringing a shark to the left. And I'm going to try this. Hopefully this works. I'm going to switch over to the actual video in a different screen because we tried this earlier, and I don't know whether it might have gone away. Just give me a moment here, and I'm going to find this. And if it doesn't work, we can show it in the actual PowerPoint video. I think I've got to switch my screen here a second, so just give me a second to do all this. The joys of virtual Zooming. Okay, let's try this, and let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that you all can see this. And Virginia, let me know if it's not coming through.
The shark bit right on the low slack, and then the fight's over here. We're just towing the animal back. Today started out the most beautiful morning we've had on the water yet this expedition, with not much wind and flat seas.
Everybody had this feeling that today was going to be the day. And a little before lunch, it happened.
A beautiful mature female came in and picked up a bait, and we were able to get a few balls in front of that fish and bring it back to the lift, and we had our first mature female of the trip.
It was SeaWorld's turn to name a shark, and we wanted to give that name away to the indigenous people of this area.
Unamaki is what the indigenous people, the Mi'kmaq people of the region, call this area. It means land of the fall.
For the Mi'kmaq people, we named this shark Unamaki.
So that was Unamaki, a beautiful big adult female white shark that we got a couple years ago off of Nova Scotia, named for the indigenous people up there. I'm going to go back now to share my screen back with the presentation. I think it's this one, I hope. Let's see. Okay. So this slide, kind of summarizes the process, and you see all these various procedures that we do in less than 20 minutes. We try to stick to 15 to 20 minutes, beginning with blood samples at the beginning and the end, and that's to for many of the projects. It's also to monitor the stress level in the animals. One of the unique things about our ship and our group is that we have an onboard laboratory where they can evaluate aspects of the blood and look at things like stress levels. And the bottom line is that these animals just really chill out on the platform. We're taking very good care of them. You saw that there was water immediately put over the gills. The eyes are typically covered. The gill slits are covered with a wet towel. The animal's kept cool with seawater. And we have a tail rope on it so it doesn't flip and hurt itself or hurt us. And the blood samples are showing that these animals are maintaining a fairly low level of stress, and it often goes down during the 15 or 20 minutes on the lift. The rest of these procedures serve all those various projects. You see ultrasound there. We have an ultrasound machine on board that our vets look for the presence of pups in the females, and they examine a variety of things, including the heart function, which I'll talk about in a second. And then in addition to what we do with the sharks, well, let me back up a second. We end by tagging the animals, and so we can track them. I'm going to talk at length about that in a second. But in addition to what we do with the sharks on the lift, we're also deploying, if you look at the bottom here, these BRUVs, these baited remote underwater video camera systems that actually pick up more sharks in the area than the ones that we're actually catching and tagging. Plus, we use environmental DNA, a new method that you can take a water sample and see if the presence of a species in the area. We're taking sampling of prey that the shark might be eating, fish, and so on, and then various kinds of other oceanographic measurements. Now this, I'm going to run this because this might be a little bit jerky, but there's no audio, so this should be fine. So this shows you sort of a tower view of all of us getting on the lift with the shark, and you see the hose in the mouth, the towel on the head, guy holding the tail rope, and this is our pit crew, our NASCAR pit crew of scientists who are, everybody knows what their role is. And we do it in two phases. We typically have the shark on its side. This one, in this one, this animal was so big that we did everything in one phase, but typically we roll the animal, have the animal on its side first, do ultrasound, put in an acoustic transmitter, and then we roll the animal up and finish the tagging process there. You see measurements happening, and finally, then the lift goes back in the water and the shark swims off. So let's talk about the tagging part. Now, we're doing so much more than tagging. That's not even 5% of all these projects, but it's the part that I care as a scientist about myself, help to lead some of that. And what is the value of the tagging? Well, it tells us where these sharks are going. Are they traveling between jurisdictions, different countries? That's important for figuring out policy and conservation plans. How deep do the sharks range? What is their preferred temperature? Their critical habitats for feeding, growth, reproduction, and then how do human activities affect them, particularly fisheries? How do they impact shark populations? So we can get this information by tracking these animals after they're in our hands. And one of our primary tools is called a satellite link tag that you put on the animal. It's either sending data or collecting data and sends it to us via satellite back from the lab. So once we let the animals go, we can go back to our labs and we can get our data in time. There's two kind of flavors here. There's the pop-up archival tag, which records some information about location, temperature, and depth, but it doesn't send it to us until it releases from the shark and comes off, and then when it's at the surface, it sends all its data to us back in the lab. The other one is the one that you may be more familiar with on the OSEARCH website. This is the spot tag that goes on the dorsal fin, and this just simply sends a signal saying, I'm here, here's my location, whenever the shark comes to the surface, and the tag is in the air. And since sharks aren't air breathers, it doesn't happen necessarily all the time, but we find with white sharks it happens quite often, that, or at least often enough that we can track them very well. So this shows on the left a spot tag on a big white shark. You can see how tiny that jewelry looks on its dorsal fin. And then on the right, there's a PSAT that's attached to in the back muscle, and that PSAT will release in about a year and send us all the data that has accrued inside the computer of that tag over that year, including, as I said, depth and temperature. The spot tags are the big ones that we use. Have battery life for about 5 years, so we hope to get 5 years or more out of the bigger ones. Then smaller animals will use a downsized version that only lasts for about a year. And so, summarizing how these work, when the shark comes to the surface, it sends the data to this Argos satellite system. That comes down to a downlink station, and then through the internet to us in the lab. We get the data and we process it, and from that we construct a track. And this is the track that you can see on the OSEARCH website at OSEARCH.org, or on the free app for your smartphone, for either your Apple or your Android smartphone that's available. The other kind of tag that we use, or tracking device, is an ultrasonic acoustic tag. This is a little thing, looks smaller than the size of a lipstick. And we insert this into the body cavity, then we suture up the opening, and the animal carries this. It's no problem for the animal. It doesn't cause any problem. The tags are sterilized before they go in, and they have battery life for 10 years. And when the animals with this tag swims into an array of underwater receivers that are listening for this high frequency sound range of transmission, then the shark is detected, and ultimately we get news that our shark has gone into somebody's receiver array somewhere else, somewhere along the coast, or maybe even possibly offshore. It's limited by where the receivers are, which is probably less than 1% of the ocean. So you don't get stuff in real time, but eventually you get very highly accurate fixes on where the animals were and where they're returning to an area over time. So before we started, I mentioned this before we started our work, we knew something about white sharks in the Northwest Atlantic, but very little in terms of detail about movements and the health of these animals. And we started the work back early, around 2012, 2013, caught a few up in the Massachusetts area. Then the program went and did some other work in other parts of the world, in South Africa and Australia and so on. And eventually came back, and we've really been digging in since about 2016. So it's about 5 years of work has now led to tagging, sampling, and getting tracks from 83 white sharks. And this is the composite of all of those spot tag tracks on the OSEARCH website for white sharks in the Northwest Atlantic. And you see, real concentration along the coast. You see some offshore movements, and you see a range that goes all the way from Newfoundland, even a little bit farther north in some cases, into the eastern Gulf of Mexico. And when you see these lines that go across, that's not a shark that's coming on shore and taking I-75 or something. That is just connecting the dots, is the way the computer algorithm does it. But this is basically the range of the white shark in the Northwest Atlantic, and this includes animals all the way from almost newborn, what we call young of the year, all the way up to full-grown older adults. Now, everybody wants to know about the biggest one. Here's the biggest one we've gotten in this study. The guys have gotten bigger ones in the Pacific, but in the Atlantic, our biggest one was caught last year off of Nova Scotia, and we named her Nagumi. She was over 17 feet long and weighed over 3,500 pounds, and she was just a spectacular animal. She's just carried the scars of a long-lived life. Nagumi, by the way, means grandmother in the indigenous language up there, and she's clearly a grandmother. That her pups have had pups by this point. We don't know how old Nagumi is, but she's got to be at least 60, perhaps even older. And she just looked amazingly healthy, but yet carrying the scars of a well-lived and exciting life at sea. And Nagumi, we tagged her and we had great hopes of tracking her for a long time. She went down the coast to North Carolina and spent a winter there. And then you see this zoom offshore, and we were very excited about when we see this happen. And this is something I'm going to explain happens with our adult females. She went out to halfway across the ocean to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and then her tag went silent, unfortunately. We did get a pop-up tag, some data from her from off the coast of the Grand Banks of Nova Scotia later in the year. And we've also gotten some what we call Z pings, or kind of transmissions without location from her spot tag. So we're absolutely confident she's alive and doing fine. She wasn't caught out there and killed. She's doing fine, just some problems with her tag, and we hope that we hear from her spot tag again soon. Well, to bring it home to you all, it's clear through our tracking work and our expeditions that the white sharks that we're working on love the Carolina coast. Look at all the tracks going by your coast, right up on the shore. It's an important part, a very important part of their life history. And I'm going to show you now another audio that's of a critical shark that we caught, a big adult male. We named Hilton. Hilton was caught off of Hilton Head, South Carolina, and really kind of focused our attention on the importance of the Carolinas, as well as Nova Scotia, to the life history of this animal. So I'm going to close this one, and I'm going to try to pull up Hilton's. And I'm doing this because if I show these videos through the PowerPoint presentation in Zoom, they get shuttery, and I think you'll enjoy it much more if I do it this way. So let's go with Hilton. Okay.
Looks like we got about a 12-foot mature male white shark out here. Wait on this one for a while. Finally got a nice little weather break and paid off. So see what happens here. So obviously it's a mature male. Hey, getting blood? How's the juice? Ready to go. All right, we're good. Mature is 6 feet 8.5 inches. The largest mature male spot tag with full health assessment workup in North Atlantic history that we're going to name it Hilton. For the great people of Hilton Head here.
So Hilton was caught a number of years ago, and go back to the presentation now. Let's see, I think it's this one. Yeah, Hilton was caught kind of early in the study, and the great thing about Hilton was, well, two things. His size, a big male, gave us all kinds of data that had never been collected before. Hilton was loaded with viable, copious amounts of sperm, which was a real critical clue to us as to where they may be reproducing. And he also, on his exploits, went up to Nova Scotia, which led us to look at Nova Scotia and the importance of that area to this population. So here's Hilton's track after we tagged and released him. It looks like I picked animals that haven't lasted very long, but quite frankly, most of our tags last longer. But this Hilton's spot tag data gave us 2 years, from March 2017 to March 2019. And you see his range, a lot of time off the Carolina coast in the southeast US, into the Gulf of Mexico. And this is all basically wintertime, overwintering period. And then these movements all the way up the coast to Nova Scotia and to Atlantic Canada, even to Newfoundland. And this is what drew our attention to the importance of this area, which had never really been investigated to any great extent before. So he covered over 18,000 miles in those 2 years. And it was a critical part of putting the puzzle together. So I'm going to jump to the chase and now show you this puzzle that we've been assembling over the last 5 years or more. This jigsaw puzzle of where these animals are born and what's going on is finally coming into focus. And we've got a paper in publication in press now that has this figure in it, and this is sort of the puzzle. This is our goal, was to figure this out when it hadn't been figured out before. But these animals start life in our nursery area up off of the Long Island area. There may be others, but we think this is the only one we know of. We were able to confirm this is a true nursery by tagging those babies and seeing that they spend their first summer there before they head south in the fall migration. And when they come south, they come to this winter nursery area that's right off your coast. So these are the 1-year-olds, the 2-year-olds, the 3-year-olds. And then they start moving back and forth and opening up this back and forth spring and fall migratory run. And by the age of about 3 or 4 years old, they're pretty much making the whole run from Atlantic Canada, including Newfoundland, all the way down and around the Gulf of Mexico Peninsula. Around the Florida Peninsula into the eastern Gulf of Mexico. So in the summertime, they're up in these northern waters from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, to beyond Newfoundland, and this is where they're really bulking up on food. This is their foraging area, their summer feeding area. And you've got all multiple sizes here, both the adults and the subadults and the large juveniles. They're feeding on things like seals and the rich food that's up there, that's full of energy. Then that's summertime, and then in the winter they come south, and their winter. Their overwintering area is everywhere from, say, Hatteras into the eastern Gulf of Mexico. And they are feeding here, but probably not getting as much food as up here. Now, the critical part, the interesting part, and the hardest part to assemble has been, where does reproduction take place? Where's mating taking place? Where the female's going? And because we've seen these large adult females spend winter here and then all of a sudden zip offshore and make these huge loops out into this area, what we've hypothesized based on the evidence is that they're mating off your coast, anywhere from Hatteras to perhaps North Florida, but especially right off the North Carolina coast. Not right up against shore, they would have been seen, but somewhere out here. And then once the females have been mated, they don't want to deal with the males anymore. They don't want to deal with anything anymore with the rest of the population. And they're going offshore and they're taking advantage of food resources out here, often diving deep and eating rich fish resources and squid and so on that are out here, until they finally return and eventually about 1.5 years, we think, later, give birth to their pups up here in the pupping ground or the summer nursery. So it's this part of it, the mating part, that we're focused on trying to finally confirm. It's a hypothesis at this point, but it's based on the evidence, like Hilton having viable sperm there in the late winter, the way the females move and come back. So this is the whole picture of white shark, the life of the white shark in the northwestern Atlantic as we now understand it. And then real quickly, I know I'm starting to run out of time, but there are all these other projects. Again, I can't possibly summarize everything, but just some highlights. I told you about the collecting of the bacteria from the mouths of the animals. This is Kim Ritchie in this slide with a student, and she's tested these various antibiotics so that she can advise medical doctors what to use. I mentioned that before. The health assessments, looking at everything from things like heavy metals in the upper left to where these animals are feeding on the food chain, to the reproductive hormones. These guys have testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone, just like us. It's very similar kind of reproductive biology to humans. In this case, this is contaminant total mercury, and then over here we see looking at under the microscope that we have on the ship, the sperm sample to show that they have viable sperm. The reproductive hormone work has yielded some very interesting results that indicates that these animals may be actually peaking or getting reaching maturity at a size a little bit smaller than what was thought, less than say 4 meters. So maybe the females more like, instead of 14 feet, maybe more like 13 feet or less, and the males instead of 10 feet, maybe 9 feet or less. So this is all new information that's come out of our work. This is shows you the first video taken with our ultrasound unit by our vets of the beating heart of a white shark on the lift. Never been done before in the wild or in captivity, as far as I know. And they have these massive, essentially 2-chamber hearts that beat very slowly, only about 6 to 10 beats per minute. And it's, again, we think, testament to the fact that they're not unduly stressed while they're on the lift. And then some of our oceanography folks, like at the University of Washington Woods Hole, have looked at the movements of our animals and correlated the offshore movements with some of these eddies that occur out in the open sea, and see diving of the animals down into these eddies and utilizing them as a source of rich food. So OSEARCH as an organization, going back to the 2000s, has taken the ship on 42 expeditions in 24 different locations around the world that you see on this map. These are not all white shark expeditions. Some of them were other species, but working with scientists all over the world in building collaborations. Almost up to about 200 scientists have taken advantage of this opportunity. I forgot to mention before, but by the way, the scientists don't pay a dollar in ship time or any of the costs of running the ship. The scientists get the ship for free, and this ship costs about $25,000 a day to operate, with everything, with the crew and all that, and fuel. So that's quite a gift to the scientific community in all these various places. 400, beyond 430, we're probably closer to 500 now. Animals have been safely studied and released with tags, and we're starting to really crank out the papers now, and got some great papers that are in progress coming out soon, next year or two. So to sum it up, especially for you all in this webinar in the Carolina coast, in the Northwest Atlantic, the juvenile to the full-grown, the whole suite of white sharks, sizes and ages, are common visitors to the Carolinas in the wintertime. We're talking about, from as early as December all the way into March, usually gone by April. That the white sharks that come there to use the coastal habitats to overwinter, to feed, and we think to mate somewhere, probably in the outer shelf, possibly in late winter and early spring, after which the pregnant females then head to these great offshore loops. These sharks migrate as far away as places like Newfoundland, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So these are highly migratory species that are found only this particular season, in the late winter, early spring, off of the Carolinas. And it's important to know the population of white sharks in the Northwest Atlantic is rebuilding. It's increasing, not not beyond what it was. We're not even close to what it was, but it is coming back. So you can expect more sightings of white sharks, more encounters with white sharks in the Carolinas in the future. And that obviously brings with it some other policy considerations. I don't think you guys have anything to worry about there. But in places like Cape Cod and even Nova Scotia, to some extent, there are some aspects of human use of waters that need to take this into account. Where are we going next? As I said, we just wrapped up our 4th expedition in Nova Scotia. Now we're home for the winter, and next March we're going to be in your backyard, trying to really get these adult males and females in the reproductive phase. And I don't think we're going to catch them in the act. We would never hope to get that, although that would be amazing. But to get the final clues that we need to nail down that this is where they're mating. So that's March. And then in July, we're going to move back up to Atlantic Canada, and we're going to try to concentrate our efforts on the south coast of Newfoundland, where we've seen so many of our animals go, maybe up into the Gulf of St. Lawrence a little bit. Then we're going to do something completely different. The plan is to take the ship across in August, across the big pond, and try our luck up off of Ireland and the UK, and maybe the French and Spanish coast, where there's very little information, but some intriguing anecdotal reports of white sharks up there. And then finally, move the ship around through the Straits of Gibraltar, and in 2023, spend time for a year or two, maybe more, in the Mediterranean, where we know white sharks do exist, population severely depleted. The whole Mediterranean is severely depleted. It's an area that really needs our help, and we're going to build new collaborations in the Mediterranean to try to build back this species and help with restoring the health and ecological balance of the Mediterranean Sea as a whole. So that's us, that's our program. Ocean Research combines to make OSEARCH, and you can follow us in real time on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Please look at our website, osearch.org, to see the tracks of these animals that I've shown you today. And our Shark Tracker app is free. You can check in all the time to see where our animals are in near real time. And I'm just going to end with a shot that that our photographer took. Pretty sure this was off the Carolina coast a couple of years ago with a big full moon. This is not retouched. This is actually the way it looked at night. Beautiful place, beautiful place. So thank you for your attention, and I'm very happy to answer any questions you might have.
Bob, that was just incredible. Just a wonderful presentation and thrilling. It's absolutely thrilling, even to see pictures on the little screen of these amazing animals. That was a fantastic presentation. We have a few questions here. There lots of praise coming in through the chat here. I'm going to try to scroll back up through it and get some of the questions here. One of the questions, it was kind of a two-part question, and that was, how do you actually capture the sharks, and then how do you keep them oxygenated once they are out of the water? That's from Donna in Charlotte.
Yeah. So capturing is a critical part of what we do. And by the way, we have to get permits for everything we do from multiple entities. So we're vetted at a very deep level by various kinds of government agencies. And it's a lot of it's about the capture side. These are big animals, and you want to do it right. You want them to be healthy. It doesn't serve anybody any good to be studying an unhealthy animal. So the capture technique that we use is a hook and line technique. We use something called a modified drum line, which is an anchored main line that goes to a series of buoys and then over to eventually to a leader and a big hook that's baited. There's a couple of varieties of this. It's not important to go into it, but the critical part is that when a shark comes up and takes the bait, the guys have rigged it so that they can't swallow the hook. It always gets caught in the jaw. And when they take it and start swimming off with it, there's a weak link in this buoy line that breaks, and the animal's basically free at that point, just kind of trailing a line of buoys behind it. And then we watch constantly these rigs that are out, and so the fishing boat goes over, picks up the terminal buoy, and then slowly starts to work its way to the shark and the shark to it. And honestly, it's like watching this is fascinating. They're not trying to out muscle the animal. You can't do that. They're sort of getting the shark to kind of give in to the process. It's like kind of like breaking a horse or putting a dog on a leash. They very quickly sort of say, okay, you got me. And then the guys essentially lead the shark. They don't drag or pull. They lead the shark over to the lift that's waiting, and we're all waiting to work on it. The shark comes up on the lift in the water. Immediately, the seawater hose goes into the mouth. Shark calms down, a tail rope goes around. We raise up the platform and the towels over the head and so on. And then we do our work in 15 or 20 minutes, ending with the tagging, and then off he goes. Most of the animals, 95% of the animals are off that lift within 30 seconds. And then the proof in the pudding of the fact that these animals are healthy and are doing fine after this kind of alien abduction experience is to look at the satellite tracks, and you see the movements of these animals, over tens of thousands of miles. So it's how we do it, and it's why I said we have the best fishing crew in the world that knows how to do this and keep everybody safe, and especially the sharks healthy and safe. Virginia, I think you're muted.
I believe Jessica has her hand up, so I think she can be unmuted to ask her question.
Hi, thank you. I just want to start off by saying thank you for doing this. It's I'm a young, very baby career scientist right now. I'm still in college, but it's one of my career dreams to work with you guys as a biologist. What do you have any advice to getting your foot in the door to be able to work on a research vessel with you guys?
Yeah, well, Jessica, I've been working with students for 40 years. And I was a student myself at one point back in the Pleistocene. The most important thing is to get good training. Go to I don't know what college or university you're at, but you have to get a good, solid scientific background if you want to be a professional researcher. So do that. Then start looking for summer internship programs. We did host our first intern on the ship this year through the University of Virginia, and she was spectacular. She was amazing, and I know it changed her life. So you can keep an eye out for the possibility for that. We do take visitors on board the ship in various places, and we're happy to have people visit us. COVID really knocked that back for a couple of years, but we're hoping that, as we all are, that things are going to turn around soon on that. And just follow along with us. We're not the only act in town, but I think we're pretty amazing what we can do. And maybe there'll be a role for you to play in the future. But get that good training. Don't shortcut anything in terms of the sciences, your science, your math, biology, chemistry, physics. Make sure you have good communication skills. Learn, take some of those courses as well. A little bit of business background isn't a bad thing either. Understand how business works and how to communicate with that world as well. And maybe we'll see you sometime down the road. And you're always welcome. Everybody's always welcome to come visit us when we do tours, when we pull into a local port.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question from Kelly asking, how long does it take the sharks to make the trip up or down the coast?
Well, basically, when they head, I'm trying to remember. My colleague Brian Franks is going to chide me if he's watching this, because they do the northward migratory run a different time frame from the southward migratory run. Obviously, different times of the year. But I think when they're going south, they're moving Brian, help me out here. I forget which one's faster. One of them is faster than the other. Let's put it that way. But it's only about, you know, it's like a month or so, and then they're down into the other areas or up into the other areas. And as I mentioned, you know, the little ones, the little tiny ones, are just moving back and forth from, say, Long Island to Hatteras or the Carolinas. But then pretty quickly, over about 3 years, they start doing the whole thing. And this is every year back and forth. They're like the snowbirds that go to Canada in the summertime and Florida in the wintertime. And I know about snowbirds here in Florida where I live. So pretty quick on these migratory runs, and then these longer periods in these either overwintering or the summer foraging areas.
Jane is asking, have changes in ocean temperature due to climate change had an effect on the migration routes?
Well, we don't know with the white shark because we're just kind of laying down the baseline now. We would guess yes. Possibly explaining the predominance of these animals in Atlantic Canada that wasn't known before. Although some of that is just simply not looking for them there. And I think they were always there, but maybe less. You know, we're rebuilding the population. That's another aspect. But we do know that for other shark species, that climate change has definitely affected their migratory movements. The coastal sharks that live in Florida are moving farther to the north now in summertime than they did before. So sort of the sharks that we always had here are getting up in the Carolinas and are becoming more abundant. Things like blacktip sharks and bull sharks and so on. So it's definitely happening. Probably happening with the white shark, but we don't have, you know, we'll see what we see in the decades to come.
Donna is asking about bycatch, and she says it's been an issue with fishing off the North Carolina coast, and she's wondering if sharks have fallen victim to this problem.
Yeah, sharks as a whole. Remember, there's about 500 different shark species, and they're all different. In the open sea, bycatch is the biggest problem that sharks face, being caught by these huge fleets of longliners that are fishing for things like tunas, excuse me, tunas and swordfish and billfish. In the coastal environment, bycatch of the little white sharks in gill nets was a real problem, and including there in the Carolinas, I think. So when we started to get a little bit more serious about restricting gill nets in the coastal waters, the bycatch started to go down. Of those young animals, we got more survivorship, and therefore, you know, the basis to rebuild the population. And remember that wherever they live, white sharks are never going to be like tremendously abundant. They're not, you know, there's never going to be like thousands and thousands off of the coast, because that's not the way nature works. You can't have the top predatory level overpopulate, because it's just like the pyramid. It's less here, then a little bit more here, and so on and so forth. It's like in Africa, you don't have more lions than gazelles, for example. So same thing's true with the white shark.
And does anyone else have any questions? I'll ask mine, which is, Ben is asking if a white shark's heart rate is able to stay as low as it is because of their large body mass and slow metabolism.
Yeah, I mean, they're big animals. The hearts are big for, you know, compared to other shark species. The thing is, their metabolic rates, though, because these are animals that are capable of some form of warm-bloodedness, in other words, moderating their internal temperature to be a little bit above ambient temperature, environmental temperature. That would argue that their metabolic rates are maybe higher than comparable sized species of sharks. Well, we really don't know, and we actually added a component to our Nova Scotia expedition. Our colleague from the University of Windsor, Nigel Hussey, was put these very interesting biologger, they're called biologger instrument packages, on our sharks. I think he put out 5 of them or so for periods of 24 to 40 hours. And one of the kinds of instruments actually measures in an indirect way their metabolic rate by looking at their movement patterns. So we'll know more about that soon. But it's a good question, and clearly, their hearts work differently from ours. But generally speaking, when you look at animals, vertebrate animals, the little ones have very rapid heartbeats, and the big ones, like elephants, are pretty slow. And the white shark is definitely on the bigger end of that range. So it's a very perceptive question. Thanks for the question.
Great. Elizabeth is asking if you could speak a little bit on the public education side of OSEARCH. How is the amazing research being done shared with the general public?
Well, it starts with what we call open sourcing. Putting our spot tag tracks out is a big step forward. I mean, most scientists hold all their data to them and clutch it carefully and then publish it, and then they'll eventually get it out to the public domain. Quite frankly, the days for that are over. We're running out of time. We can't do it that way. So we share our data. We obviously can't share all the samples and the results of all the samples. And by the way, in this last Nova Scotia expedition, we worked up 10 animals, full workup on 10 animals, and from those we got more than 600 samples for these various projects. So it starts with that. And then we're constantly pushing out content on social media platforms to keep people engaged. We're doing stuff in real time. We're trying to invite you to be part of the expedition with us on the ship. We're doing things like this, obviously, and we also have a STEM program of curricula of subject matter for a variety of grades, all the way up to, I think, lifelong learning type levels, and it's just constant, the amount of information we're putting out there, which for me as chief scientist is challenging, because you want to make sure that we're never putting out inaccurate information. So we try real hard to be accurate in everything we say and do and pass on to the public. There's so much garbage out there now, as we all know, especially about sharks on the internet. So we feel like we're trying to be a beacon of factual knowledge through our social media, and I'm very proud of that component, which I've helped to bring to the program.
Great. Well, Frank, speaking of social media, Frank is asking, how did you come up with the idea of giving the sharks Twitter feeds? And what a brilliant idea that was to engage the public.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the guy to answer that, because I have no idea. This happened essentially even before me, about the time I guess I started with him. And I'm not a Twitter guy. I have a Twitter account. I don't hardly use it. So I don't know. I can't answer that. But I'll tell you, it's highly effective. I know that people enjoy it. There are people that run those Twitter accounts that are doing putting the tweets out, making the remarks, and going back and forth. And I know it's great fun, but it's also highly powerful in terms of not only getting out information, but also more personalizing these animals, that they're not just these dumb fish, but they really do have important lives, important roles to play in the ocean. And individual personalities, even, that some of these animals come to the surface more than others. Some of them are females that are heading offshore. So the Twitter side of it has been very successful, and I know it's gotten people excited, especially when one of these sharks swims into their local area, and what a change! When I started my career, the only good shark was a dead shark as far as the public was concerned. And now people are rooting for the white shark that's coming to their beach. That's an amazing turnaround since the Jaws era. And a lot of it's because of the Twitter and the social media, the power of social media to do positive change.
Well, we were certainly obsessed with Mary Lee here a couple of years ago. We have one more question from Jonathan. He's asking about pop-off cameras. Have there been any efforts to attach a pop-off camera for a few days to understand sharks' daily activities?
Yes, we've done some of that. The limiting factor with cameras, with video technology, is the memory that's accrued is huge, and it can't be, unfortunately yet, transmitted, say, via satellite to us through telemetry. So you have to retrieve the camera, and you learn a few things in a matter of, say, a day, but some of that is the animal kind of, getting back to its normal behavior. You might possibly catch a feeding event. In North Carolina, maybe we would catch if we were super lucky, catch a mating event, but it's a long shot. It's really a long shot. So yeah, we've learned some things, but most of the camera work that's been done has been more for television, and you get a sense of the point of view of the animal. But we feel like we learned so much more with these other instruments that we're using.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Jessica Huff, who desperately wants to work with you, has headed out, and I'm sure she'll be in touch. And does anyone else, before we leave, have any more questions? No? Any idea why they heal so quickly? White shark.
It's a subject of research at my previous laboratory, Moat Marine Laboratory, and that group there. The fact that they're very quick healers, and they really don't show much sign of disease. Very low, super low, almost non-existent, not quite non-existent of cancer in these animals. The healing process occurs rapidly. I can't tell you why it's rapidly, but I can tell you what. When they get a wound, the upper layers that start to form over that wound come in very quickly compared with, say, us or other mammals. It starts with that. Also with the bacteria that are present to prevent the site from getting infected. They have sort of good bacteria that fight off the bad bacteria. Probably a combination of things. These are animals that have been on this planet for 400 million years. They go through some rough stuff. Our animals up north show signs of battles with seals, with claw marks all over the faces and the sides. When they mate, the males bite on the females and put big scars in the females. So they've evolved to handle all this. And one of the mechanisms is this really rapid and efficient wound healing. We can learn so much from these animals. There's so much more yet to learn. We cannot allow them to go extinct because we've just started to scratch the surface of what we can learn from the shark.
Well, again, thank you so much. And if there's any additional information when we send out the recording of the video to participants and people who registered who weren't able to attend in real time about how to support your efforts, we would love to send that along to them. So please.
It's a pleasure being with you all today. Keep in mind that picture of the puzzle, the model, has not been published yet, so I ask everybody not to distribute that part of it because it's still in review, essentially. Okay. But I hope I was able to give everybody some good information. And remember, folks, that any information about sightings of white sharks in the Carolinas, we're very interested. I'm sure you can get a hold of me through Island Wildlife, and Virginia can help with that. Anything, photos, videos, just your sightings. White sharks are sometimes a little bit harder to identify, but we can take a look and see what we've got. It might help us with our research, and together we can learn and finally unravel the mystery of the mating time and place of the white shark in the Northwest Atlantic.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, and we'll have to check back in when you're in the area in 2022.
We're up there in March. No doubt we'll have some ports of call, and we hopefully, if everything's gotten back to more normal life, we'll have the ship open for tours. So come and see us. Follow us along on our social media platforms, and come and see us when we're up in the Carolinas next March. We always get bad weather up there, so we definitely will be in for part of it. I can pretty much guarantee that. It's a rough time, but the work has to be done, and it's a grind. But we have to have pretty good weather for this to be on this platform. We can't be in rough seas. The ship can handle anything, but it's the platform. So when the weather's bad, come see us. We'll be in port somewhere. We were in Morehead City last year quite a bit, and
Very good.
Had a good time there.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thanks to all of you. Have a great